Good afternoon and welcome to IMD. It's Wednesday, the 30th of May, 1600 Central European Time. We're glad that you've taken time out of your schedule to join us for an exclusive preview of the IMD 2012 World Competitiveness Yearbook results, which will be officially released tomorrow. But we're glad that you, as a member of our network, that you're able to be with us today for an exclusive preview of what's going to be released for the results tomorrow. So Stephane Garelli, I'm very pleased to have Professor Stephane Garelli with us, Director of IMD's World Competitiveness Yearbook. You're going to take us through the results. Just before we get into that, if you're watching today and anything that Stephane says in the next 20 minutes, you have a question about it, you don't agree with him, you want to go further with something, maybe you've got a specific question about your country, feel free to send your questions in the next 20 minutes and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. So Stephane, let's jump straight in. 2012 World Competitiveness, who are the winners?
So we are going to see the results, which are going to be announced in a few hours from now. And in order to illustrate those results, I have brought my little flags, and I better not make any mistakes. So the winners this time is Hong Kong, #1, closely followed by the United States of America, #2, and #3 for the first time on the podium is Switzerland. These are the three top one. But let's go a bit further, not too much, but we should see #4, of course, Singapore. I think very few would be surprised to find Singapore so close to the top. Then we have #5, Sweden, which is an extremely good performance for Sweden. Really the northern star in terms of competitiveness, doing extremely well as a smaller nation. And then followed by Canada. I think the Canadians who are watching us will be very happy because there are some riots in Canada. So these are good news still coming from Canada. Then we have, of course, Taiwan coming in. Very good news, of course, because Taiwan has been struggling with competitiveness for some time and is improving very well. And then we have Norway coming here. And Norway is doing well. I pushed my little flags a little bit so you have more room. And Norway has been, of course, very successful because of commodities. I mean, it's a game of oil and gas and everything. So I think it was very much in support of the commodity-producing nations. Germany, nobody would be surprised to have Germany in 9th position. Very export-oriented, of course. Very strong middle-sized companies. We will come back on that. But Germany, the success story in Europe, and maybe everybody is going to look at Germany for the recovery. And #10, very interesting, Qatar. Of course, a success story in the Arab world. So these are the winners of the World Competitiveness Yearbook 2012. And, well, it's a different world.
So lots to talk about there. Not so many European countries, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But let's start with number one, Hong Kong. What have they been doing well?
Well, I think they've been doing almost everything well. I mean, to be #1, of course, very good government efficiency in Hong Kong, benefiting from the proximity of China, of course. I think Hong Kong has done very well in 2011. The beginning of the year is a little bit tougher. I think we see a slowdown in the world economy, and of course Hong Kong is, of course, feeling the reaction of this slowdown. Also China is going down a little bit, growing 8.1%. So 2011, very good. 2012, a bit tougher.
Okay. So Hong Kong have remained firm. US, #2, an economy that really touches every other economy in the world. It's pretty much a nexus for the world economy. Is the US going to be the driver moving forward for economic growth and economic recovery?
Well, we hope so. Actually, if we are looking at the results in the emerging economies, everybody is going down almost, except Hong Kong, Mexico, which are doing very well. But most of the nations are just stable because the world economy is experiencing a slowdown. Europe, of course, is a little bit in disarray and experiencing also some discontinuity in the recovery, if we can put it that way. So actually everybody is looking back to the United States of America to be back again the locomotive of the world economy. Now, it's not only because of the size of the US, the technology, it's not only because the US has very powerful enterprises, no doubt, but it's also because of the fact that the US is one of these economies which is very much integrated with the others economy of the world. Almost every nation has, how could I say, has business with the US, investment, trade with the US. So this high level of integration means that when the US is going up, then the rest of the world is following.
So the US, you believe, is still going to be a driver, a landmark figure, I guess, that the other countries will need to look to or certainly interact with as part of their recovery.
Yes, you're right. And especially now that we have election in the US, we know by experience that when we have an election period, actually we only have good news. And I think that the government, the administration will do whatever they can in order to provide the market with positive news before the election, and actually it could be some very good news for the rest of the world.
So good news for the rest of the world for now. If we come back to the American elections in November, can we expect surprises in December? Are we going to see some austerity measures, belt tightening in 2013?
I don't think that our American friend has the same conception of austerity as our German friends. In Germany, you know, the feeling of austerity is almost an ethical concept. I mean, it's not about really economics. It's about the way you behave in life. You don't spend more than you earn. And I think Mrs. Merkel said that recently again. I think that in America, it's much more economic policy, much more pragmatic. And I have the feeling that until the election, everything will be done to sustain the economy, to make sure that the economy goes up. After the election, we are likely to see some more drastic measures, in my opinion, especially on the side of taxes. We have to expect a profound reform of the tax system in the US. Today, the tax receipts in the US are 23% of the GDP. This is one of the lowest in the world. It's even lower than Greece. And I think a country of the size of the US needs more tax receipt. So we will see tax reform in the US for personal taxes, for capital gains, which is only 15% now, and for also corporate taxation.
So there's some of the music to come. What about the dollar? How do we expect that to perform post-election?
First, the dollar is going to strengthen, obviously, during the rest of the year because the euro is getting weaker. Because, frankly, there is not much alternatives. We have seen recently that for the first time, there is going to be common trade between the yen and the renminbi, the yuan. So this is the first attempt to go out of the dollar zone. But if we look at currency trading today, 80% almost is in dollars. Foreign currency reserve, 62% is in dollars. I think the dollar is still there, even if it's becoming weaker, maybe. But the euro becoming even weaker, I mean, there is not much alternative.
In the US as well, we see some reshoring of manufacturing.
Yes.
Manufacturing that was sent off to emerging markets is coming home.
Yes.
Perhaps in a different way, perhaps in a more technologically focused way, in a more streamlined way. Do we expect to see more of that?
Yes, I think the concept of made in is a very important concept in competitiveness because a country at the end is what it makes. And very often it has a very big impact on the image of the nation. And I think we are going to see a lot of, as you said, reshoring. People thinking, you know, in the old days, we used to export manufacturing or assembling to China, to India, etc., because it was low cost and because the cost of shipping was very low. Now, labor costs are increasing about 20% a year in India and in China. The cost of transport is more expensive because the cost of oil, the price of oil is going up. So a lot of people, and then we have unemployment, we need the jobs. So a lot of people are saying, maybe it makes sense to bring some of the business back home. A company like General Electric is building a very big factory in Louisville, Kentucky, saying, you know, some of the household appliances we used to make in China, we can make them back into the United States of America. In Europe also we do the same, and let's not forget that Germany, that we have here, is a country which is not only exporting, but manufacturing. And I think this is one of the lessons of competitiveness today. You have to make something. So,
US probably in a good place. We can't continue, before we go into more details, we can't continue without talking about Switzerland. That would not be good news. Switzerland's on the podium, I think, for the first time ever in third place. Hopefully this bodes well for the Olympic Games. What has Switzerland done to get up to the third place?
I think that Switzerland has done a lot of things. The first thing is fiscal discipline. I mean, we are all thinking about putting some rules to keep government deficits under control. Switzerland has that since almost 10 years. Second, Switzerland has been exporting. Number three, it has been making stuff. You know, sometimes I go abroad and people tell me, Switzerland, this is all about finance and a bit of chocolate. And I said, well, what about the watches? Oh, yes. What about pharmaceutical? Oh, yes. What about food? Oh, yes. We are making things. And number 4, I think Switzerland is very competitive like other nations because also it has good small and medium-sized enterprises. We see the same thing with Germany, the Mittelstand. We see the same thing with Sweden. The medium-sized enterprise are very powerful, very technology-driven, very export-oriented. And I think it makes a difference. And we start all to discover that the medium-sized enterprise are very powerful. You know, if you go to France, it's striking. I mean, you go in the Jura, which is next to us. The valleys are wonderful, full of trees. And that's it. You cross the border, you go to Germany, the valleys are just as beautiful, full of trees, but you have enterprises in the middle of them. Actually, 70% of the medium-sized enterprises in Germany are in the countryside. Mm-hmm. So I think this is an interesting concept for the future.
So Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, 3 European countries
yes.
in the top 10, but none other to be seen. This has got to be bad news about the situation in Europe.
I think what strikes me in Europe, but also worldwide this year in terms of competitiveness is a fragmentation of the world competitiveness landscape. Actually, everything is available. Certain countries are in recession, like Greece and Spain now. Certain countries are overeating, Turkey, maybe China, growing extremely fast. Certain countries are confronted with inflation. We see it with India and Russia. Certain countries are confronted with deflation, like Japan and Switzerland. So actually, you name it, you have it. And once upon a time, the global economy was synonymous of synchronization. We were in sync. Now we are not in sync anymore. It goes in every direction. And the impact on companies is that you need several parallel business models in order to tackle very different national situations. This is a nightmare because it means you don't get anymore one model that fits everything. So this is probably the consequence of competitiveness on company strategy.
Is this going to lead to more protectionism as well?
I don't think it will lead to protectionism as such, but it will lead to more economic nationalism. I think that every nation is going to be very much conscious of the necessity to have some national champions. When we are speaking about reshoring or manufacturing or made in, somehow it's also about the national industry. I mean, it's very much local and national oriented. So we will have national champions back. I think countries are very conscious about that. In China, if you take the 22 largest companies in China, 21 of them are directly financed by the government. So this would happen in many other emerging nations. So I think there is a consciousness that maybe it's important also to have your own companies which are powerful, which are exporting, etc. So economic nationalism, yes. Protectionism, I don't think so. I think this is in the interest of nobody. You know what people say, the difference between an economic recession and an economic depression is protectionism. Mm.
We're getting a lot of questions in, some of them about Europe and of course some questions about Greece. One very direct question from Paulo Sacco in Brazil is asking, when will Greece leave the Eurozone?
Well, it will depend on Greece. They are voting on the 17th of June, so we shall know. I hope they don't leave, frankly speaking, because if Greece leaves the Eurozone, it will be a catastrophe for the Greek people first, not only for Europe could survive. It's 2.3% of the GDP of Europe. This is acceptable. And I would even suspect that if Greece leaves Europe, the euro will go up because a lot of people will say, well, this was 80% of the problems. Now we can concentrate on the rest. But for the Greek people, I hope they don't leave because first imagine the time it will take to relaunch a new old currency, to go from the euro to the drachma. Will take at least 6 months. 6 months is a long period of time to reintroduce a currency. And during these 6 months, everything can happen. Mm-hmm. When the American introduced a new currency in Iraq, it took 3 months and a half, 25 Boeing 747, just to make sure it would happen. And behind that, you had the Fed, you had the US Treasury, everybody was working. Our Greek friends, I don't think they can reintroduce that. And then once you have the drachma back, who is going to accept it? You know, if our Greek friends want to buy something abroad, everybody will say, not in drachma, you pay in euro, you pay in dollars, but forget about your drachma. So I have the feeling that it's not in the interest of Greece to do it. Surprisingly enough, they had an opinion poll recently in Greece, and more than 2/3 of the Greek people said they want to keep the euro. Because they are not stupid. They know that with the euro, they have a currency which is international, tradable, convertible. And with the drachma, unfortunately, they may have a currency that nobody will want.
Now, another question about Brazil. We talked before about the BRIC countries. And this year, Russia has remained stable, but Brazil, India, China have all gone down.
Yes.
Do we need to read anything sinister into that, or is that a blip that will be recorrected next year?
Well, if we take Brazil, it's a small blip, which is due at the same time the strength of the real, the interest rates which are very high. I mean, these are something which will be solved. I mean, some more serious problem in terms of labor skills and infrastructure, but I think Brazil will be back. I think the lesson is, despite the fact that we do have a South-South bloc in the making, despite the fact that we have more trade and investment between the emerging economies themselves, between China and Brazil, Russia and Central Europe, etc., or Central Asia, I think still those nations are depending on Europe and the US. I think that we see Europe going down a little bit, Europe going in stagnation, let's not say recession, stagnation. The US not recovering as strongly as we would have expected. I think we see that it has an impact on the rest of the world. And that's why, we began the discussion by saying how important it is for the United States of America to be back the locomotive of the world. We see it now. When the rest of the world is stalled, when the rest of the world doesn't move anymore, the emerging nations have a lot of difficulties to grow by themselves.
And what about China? We see people kind of throw their hands up in horror and say only 8% growth, which some other countries
would take it any day.
Could be dreaming about, exactly. Is that a slowdown that you think is gradually going to become slower and slower? Is it stabilizing? How do you see China playing out?
I mean, China has a very difficult situation to handle because inside the country, you have a bubble in real estate. You have a financial credit, personal credit situation, which is not very healthy, with a lot of parallel credit being given. So the government starts to calm down the economy. On the other hand, the government would like very much to have domestic demand going up because they realize that they are over-dependent on exports, over-dependent on what's happening in the US and Europe. So I think the Chinese government will be pretty happy with 8%. I mean, historically, 7% was really the target of the plans in China. So my feeling is that it's just a matter of how well you manage the slowdown. Frankly speaking, 8% is something where a lot of countries will be very happy to have. And I have the feeling that the government, or the next one, because we have a change of government in China very soon, the next one will be very happy to manage 8%.
And Latin America?
I think that Latin America is having a much better situation in many countries. Chile, Mexico is doing a bit better. Venezuela, let's not speak about it. We have also a situation which is a bit awkward in Argentina, with some doubt maybe about the statistics which are coming out of Argentina. But the country with a lot of potential, but this is much more a political issue. The nationalization which have taken place recently with Repsol, this has not given the right message. But the potential of Latin America is enormous, so I think we should remain positive on Latin America.
Now, in this year's report, one of the pieces of data that you've collected is about attitudes towards globalization. Yes. And I think it's fair to say there seems to be increasing skepticism about globalization, with France just next door coming right at the bottom in terms of being most skeptical about globalization. Can you tell us what this means, and is this good news for François Hollande?
Well, the good news is that you cannot go lower, because in the ranking, the attitudes toward globalization, France ranks number last, 59. And on the other criteria that we have taken, it's acceptance of reforms, economic and social reforms. France is also ranking number 59 and last one in the ranking. So basically what it means is, number one, that competitiveness is not about just economics. It's also about attitudes. It's also about the mindset. It's also about the value system. And of course, you're right. I mean, a number of countries have doubt about globalization because we told everybody it's going to be the way to prosperity, the way to solve problems. Unfortunately, in many cases, it was more offshoring, more loss of jobs. And we realize in Europe we have historically high level of unemployment, 10.9%. In the US, the same thing, 8.6%. Youth unemployment is reaching level that we have never seen before, which should keep in mind 49.5% in Spain, 51% in Greece, which means younger people under the age of 24 not finding a job. So people are saying globalization, yes. I mean, I can have products from the world over, very good. But at the end of the day, what does it do to my job? Not only to my life, but to my job. Do I have job security? Do I have, as I thought, more revenues? No. So I think there is some questioning. And that's why I feel we are going back, not to protectionism, but economic nationalism, more reindustrialization, manufacturing. People are questioning total globalization. I think it will remain an open world, but with some security net.
So we see, you talked briefly there about Spain and youth unemployment. We hear people today talking about the lost generation, people who are graduating, coming out of school or university now and just can't find a job. As you mentioned, almost 50% unemployment in Spain. If I'm the Spanish government, what's my solution to that? We've talked about some of the austerity measures that are in place, but what's the stimulus for growth? Where is that going to come from?
First, regarding youth unemployment, I think that in the immediate future, one of the solutions is, of course, to make it cheaper to employ the younger generation, which means reducing the employer's taxation when you hire somebody who is young and trying to find contracts which will favor the younger generation. Regarding the longer term, I think that one of the most drastic revolutions we are seeing in the economy, it seems to me that with the technology a bit everywhere, we start to see more and more jobs being created outside the enterprise context. We are from a generation together, Paul, where a job means going to work in a company. But the younger generation will be able to find job outside a company. From home, they can write a blog, they can publish a book. From home, they can produce energy with a windmill. They can produce energy with a solar panel and re-inject it into the grid. Very soon, they may be able to produce products with a 3D printer. So actually, we are going to go into a kind of economy which is not going to happen inside the enterprise world. This is new. We have it with information, of course, with the blogs, with the social network. Something is happening outside the enterprise world. This is very new. Very different. Today, when a company is being attacked because apparently they didn't do something well, it used to be, I am attacked by a newspaper, I can identify precisely who is attacking me. Tomorrow, when we are going to have this very blurred, whoops, sorry about Hong Kong, this very blurred environment where you are attacked by a blog or something, you don't know who is in front of you. And this is going to be very, very difficult to manage. But I believe that employment in the future will take place more and more outside the enterprise world, which, by the way, is what the younger generation want.
So consumers becoming producers, effectively.
Exactly. That's a very good definition of it. Consumers are becoming producers. Every consumer, you and I, will become the producer of the future. I always wonder, why do I have to buy all my energy to the same producer? Why, can't I produce a little bit of energy myself, re-inject it in the grid? I can be a producer on many things, even on information.
We have a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get to them all, but one specific question is, what can you say about Turkey?
I think that the danger about Turkey has good numbers. Turkey has been growing very quickly. The big danger about Turkey is overeating. I think that personal credit has been increasing extremely rapidly in Turkey, about 27% a year. It's a bit dangerous, as we know it. Turkey traditionally has a tendency to trigger inflation, high level of inflation, dangerous. And this would be okay to sustain the domestic demand that way if you could export. But in addition, Turkey has a balance of trade deficit and a balance of current account deficit. So I think it's a situation which is a little bit touchy, a little bit disquieting. And one has to be careful with Turkey. Now, the potential is considerable, is enormous. I think Turkey should be part of the strategy of any company today, no doubt. Very young population, very eager to succeed, very well educated in many ways. But I think it is in the risk of overeating now.
We talked roughly before about the BRIC countries.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about India.
Yeah.
We've got a question about Russia and how you see that going. But let's look for India for a moment. We see still maybe a little bit of red tape bureaucracy, which is stopping some of the economic growth that the country has potential for. How do you see that evolving?
I think it's a problem we see in a lot of emerging countries, nations, economies, is the fact that we have a lot of difficulties, what we call the ease of doing business. It's not only bureaucracy, it's corruption, it's briberies, it's everything. Now, it's a problem in India, and the Indian government is trying to tackle this. It's a problem in Russia, it's a problem in many countries where actually doing business is not that easy, let's face it. It's not very transparent. The rules of the game are not known very well. And in addition, sometimes you wonder really if it's a state of law or not. So I think that the clarification of the rules of the game is a priority, especially also for India, because the potential of India is also enormous. And the second thing is the predictability of the government strategy. The problem of India in the past has been, shifting priorities all the time. I'm open, I'm closed, open, closed. Nobody knew exactly in which direction the country was going. I think there was some more stabilization recently, but the name of the game is more predictability for India, more ease of doing business, and of course, a little bit less red tape.
Finally, we've had several questions about Europe and the Eurozone. You talked before about Greece maybe dropping out of the Eurozone, but that being a very small 2.3% of GDP. Do you foresee any situation, maybe linked with what you said before, with more national pride, maybe not protectionism, but local champions? Is there a risk that other European nations start to pull out of the euro, to go back to their own currency and say, we're managing things in a more independent manner?
I think it's very difficult to predict what people will do or will think. My feeling is that the only way out is a way ahead. And I think we have to realize that if we want to build Europe, if people want to build Europe, they have to do it with a central bank which is much more powerful than it is today, with a mutualization of the debt, in simple terms, Eurobonds, and with the fact that suddenly you have one central organization which is deciding about the euro. To give you an example, we are in the situation in Europe like if in the United States of America we would have 50 state governors, California, Illinois, etc., meeting in a room and deciding what would be the future of the dollar. It would be unmanageable. They have a Fed, they have a president, he has a board, and he decides and he makes it happen. And he has the capacity to print money, he has the capacity to assume the debt of the various parts of the United States. As long as we do not have the means in Europe to fight for the euro and to defend the euro in an unlimited way, and this is being talked to everybody, I think we will have the same problems. When you have countries, I will not make any name, who are telling, yes, but we don't accept mutualization of the debt, we don't accept to be responsible for the others, then you cannot have a common currency. A common currency is a common destiny, it's a common fate.
Stephane, we're pretty much out of time. Let's wrap this up today. What are the key lessons, the key takeaways for viewers watching today from the 2012 IMD World Competitiveness Yearbook results?
I think it's what I mentioned earlier. Number one, a very fragmented economy, world economy, means we will have to learn to work with several business models in parallel. Not easy, but we have to accept it. There is no more one global strategy for companies. Let's be more sensitive to the local environment, more sensitive to the local difference economically, but also socially and politically. Number two, let's make sure that we have nations which are fiscal discipline. Number three, export-oriented. Number four, made in. You have to make something. This is very important. The made in concept is unavoidable. And finally, the medium-sized enterprise are the name of the game. We have to help them. Every country has large companies at the top, competitive. It's not that every country has smaller companies, medium-sized enterprise, which are successful. This is where we have probably to focus our attention, and that's why we will have a lot of job creation.
Stephane, that's a nice positive note to leave things on. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you're curious about the world that you live in and what's happening in the global economy, you may be interested to join us again next week. We'll be starting a 4-week series on Asia Pacific. So if you're interested in that part of the world, do tune in again next Wednesday for the start of that 4-part series. From all of us here at the network, thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again shortly. Bye-bye.